Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to How the Technology Industry is Driving Sound Policy. I'm Jason Oxman, President and CEO of ITI, the trade association of the technology industry. I'm thrilled to have everyone with us today. At ITI, we believe that technology is a crucial ingredient to all of our shared prosperity, and it drives progress. Done right, technology helps us develop solutions to some of society's most pressing issues. How does it do this? Well, tech improves health outcomes. It brings independence to those who have mobility issues. It can help us build a more equitable and secure society. During COVID, we know that technology helps keep us all connected and helps our children to learn. Technology has become an essential part of how we lead better, healthier, more secure, and more productive lives. We also know that good and sound public policy can help technology to live our lives better. It helps create an environment where we support economic growth. It supports good jobs and opportunities so innovation can flourish. For more than 100 years, ITI has represented the world's most innovative companies, companies that create the technologies that have become a foundation for our economy and our society. But innovation only works for everybody if we have good policies to support and help facilitate it. That means a framework for protecting consumer privacy. It means policies that help our networks and our devices operate more safely. It means policies that encourage STEM programs so children are ready for next generation jobs. It means policies that help protect our environment for future generations. And that's why today we're excited to launch a campaign to highlight the technology industry's positive impact on our world and how good policy solutions are essential to help us address the most challenging issues that we face. To kick off our new campaign, I'm thrilled to bring you a conversation today with two industry leaders and chief executives of ITI member companies. Barbara Humpton is president and CEO of Siemens Corporation. And Amit Yoran is chairman and CEO of Tenable. Before we start our conversation, a couple of quick housekeeping notes. First of all, for the sake of time, we will be answering audience questions that have been submitted to us in advance. Also, we're recording today's conversation and we'll upload it to our YouTube channel in case you miss any of it today. And I encourage you all to follow the conversation that ensues from today's event. On Twitter, we can use the hashtag #BridgeForInnovation to continue that conversation. Now, let me introduce Barbara and Amit to you. Barbara is president and CEO of Siemens Corporation, where she guides the company's strategy and engagement in its largest global market. Siemens USA employs about 40,000 people and serves customers in all 50 states and Puerto Rico. Amit is chairman and chief executive officer of Tenable. He oversees the company's strategic vision and direction, and he's also a thought leader in the world of cybersecurity. As the threat landscape increases, Amit and Tenable are working to help organizations meet the challenges of evolving threats. Amit and Barbara, thank you so much for being with us today. Barbara, I want to start our conversation by asking you about a pressing issue in DC today, and that is infrastructure. You know, it's one of the most tired jokes in DC, but always guaranteed to get a laugh, and that is it's infrastructure week. Well, again, it's infrastructure week this week, as it has been so often. And of course, ITI members and Siemens, I know in particular, are very interested in the progress of that infrastructure bill. ITI member companies around the country are working to advance technology solutions for transportation, for energy grid usage, and all manners of physical infrastructure. So I wanted to ask you to share Siemens' perspective on this, how Siemens, first and foremost, is using technology innovation to support infrastructure modernization.
Oh, thanks, Jason. It's a great pleasure to be with you. I'm really thrilled to help launch the campaign, and happy Infrastructure Week to you too. It seems to be our perennial greeting. You know, we at Siemens, we are a focused technology company. We're working on technology that transforms the everyday for everyone. It involves bringing the digital and physical worlds together to reshape and reimagine both industry and infrastructure. So think about things like factories that are more agile and productive, or buildings and grids that are more intelligent and efficient, and a transportation system that's more reliable and sustainable. You know, people often talk about the Internet of Things. I like to call it the Internet of really big things. Connecting our infrastructure really is what's going to be a great tool to solve the biggest challenges ahead and chart the next century of American growth and leadership. But you're absolutely focused on the things that are most pertinent here, because we're going to have policy issues. We are certainly going to have cybersecurity issues. So lots to talk about today.
So absolutely. And Barbara, we're talking, of course, about technology innovation, which is what Siemens does. And you obviously spend a lot of your time with your 40,000 team members deploying those technology innovations across the country. But we're also here, for better or worse, to talk about public policy. So I wanted to ask you, just as a quick follow-up on that question of infrastructure investment, what can the government do to help here? What are you looking for government to do and encouraging government to do to help as Siemens looks to deploy these technology infrastructure investments?
Yeah. Well, yeah, let me just start by saying we've been really vocal throughout this whole cycle, working on supporting a bipartisan approach to infrastructure. It's our firm belief that if we can create a governmental framework that sets out audacious goals, right, the government really can help spark the competitive environment. We think here in the US, we get the equation right, where a government would not be in a position to sort of legislate innovation in, but by unleashing the power of innovation in the private sector, government can do a lot to set the stage and jumpstart action that'll get us to tipping points in new technologies faster than if the private sector just had to make all of the investments alone. A simple example is, a member of Congress had asked, well, why should the government be investing in vehicle charging infrastructure? And my answer is, hey, it's true, the gas station network didn't get built by government action. But on the other hand, if we wait for the private sector to respond to public demand, it will take time. This is a moment where government can absolutely accelerate change. But interoperability is going to be one of the key elements here too. Competition is one thing, but if we're creating a bunch of proprietary solutions, that might actually hinder progress. So, as we think about that electric vehicle charging, what we'd love to see is this investment coupled with support of open standards in the marketplace, so that what we get is an interoperable set of new private sector provided charging stations that all of us as users can use freely as we work our way across the country.
Such an excellent point. And ITI, as an ANSI accredited standards body itself, is a huge proponent of those public-private partnerships, and the private sector's focus on standards activity is so important. And I love your example of the gas stations there, because the government investment in the interstate highway system is what gave us the automobile industry, and sometimes the government needs to kickstart those investments. And the electric vehicle area is is certainly one of those areas where government investment is going to be important to move it forward. Amit, I want to talk to you about cybersecurity. I know you're an electric vehicle driver yourself, so I know you support those kind of infrastructure investments. But let's talk about critical infrastructure from Tenable's perspective, which of course is the threats to technology. And I want to ask you to address Tenable's approach to preparing for and mitigating those risks as we look at all of these critical infrastructure investments, because cybersecurity is an important component of that, of course.
Yes, absolutely. Cybersecurity is an absolutely critical component when you're talking about critical infrastructures. Critical infrastructures are, by their very nature, a massive target because they matter. They're not, hey, luxury infrastructures. They're critical infrastructures. And they become a very lucrative target for cyber criminals, for nation state adversaries. If you want to create a lot of pressure, or if you want to disrupt the American way of life or our nation, our economy, what have you, it's going after the critical infrastructure. And you're seeing it happen in some industries already. You've seen examples in recent periods with Colonial Pipeline, with JBS. You've seen it internationally with the disruption of Ireland's healthcare service infrastructure. We need to create a culture where organizations that are deploying and operating critical infrastructure have a requirement to understand the technology they've deployed, how that technology is vulnerable or creates exposure for their business processes and for the delivery of that critical service to the general public. There's very clearly a public good here, and that they're executing and moving forward with reasonable risk management practices around those critical infrastructures. And this is an area where the government has regulated and sector-specific agencies have put guidance out for, I wouldn't say forever, but for a long period of time. It's certainly within their comfort zone. If you're going to operate, these are the safety standards that we require, or these are the safety standards that you have to abide by. And I think we've entered an area of reliance and exposure around cybersecurity, where absolutely that cybersecurity standard needs to be established and embraced. And organizations operating these critical infrastructures need to recognize that it is a critical part of their business and risk management practices. So there's lots to do here. From Tenable's perspective, we do work very closely with a number of critical infrastructure sectors, oil and gas, power and energy, manufacturing sectors, and in technology in particular. We're looking not just at general purpose IT, but we're looking very specifically at their operational technologies environments, helping them to identify risk and better manage that risk.
And as you're working through that, and you just listed a number of critical breaches that we're reading about in the paper every day. And obviously, this is a huge issue for all industries, not just the technology industries. I wonder if I can just quickly follow up and ask you for perhaps some reason for optimism. Are you seeing anything in the policy environment, any movements or any other kind of awareness or shift in attitude that gives you some hope that policymakers recognize and understand that this is a crisis situation that we need to make the investments to address?
Hope is a very dangerous thing in the cybersecurity field, but I would say that there's absolutely a tremendous opportunity in front of us right now, and there certainly are those opportunities which can be very impactful to our future. I think when you look at the bipartisan infrastructure bill, if we can include cybersecurity requirements into those infrastructure projects, that can move this issue forward in a meaningful way. If we don't include cybersecurity requirements as part of that, then shame on us. We've missed an opportunity at an absolutely critical juncture. There's other things that are cause for encouragement. I think in the early periods here of the Biden administration, there's been a lot of energy and a lot of effort and a lot of activity around cybersecurity. We've seen multiple executive orders and actions, by the administration that says, hey, this is, and some terrific hires on the personnel side that very clearly call out the importance of this issue, not the least of which is the work with NATO and G7 partners, rallying folks at the beginning here of Cybersecurity Awareness Month around the scourge of ransomware and cybercrime that we're seeing. So there's a tremendous opportunity in front of us. There seems to be tremendous enthusiasm in the early days of the Biden administration, and hopefully we'll continue with this as a bipartisan issue, making it mainstream in some of the broader infrastructure planning practices.
And Amit, one thing that we're obviously very focused on, you are and Barbara is as employers, and we're focused on it as an industry. Indeed, the country is focused on the COVID recovery, and a lot of the intersection with the technology industry and the conversation about how we address COVID has been a national conversation about healthcare technology. And I wanted to ask you, Amit, to talk to us about what the sharing of secure data means in the area of healthcare technology. So making sure doctors have access to the information they need to treat us quickly and monitor conditions in patients before they become a problem. Wrapped up in this is the natural tendency of consumers to be concerned about sharing their most sensitive data, and obviously health data doesn't get much more sensitive than that. So talk to me a little bit about Tenable's approach and the work you're doing to help establish trust and security in these kind of sensitive online ecosystems.
I think you're hitting on an absolutely critical point, which is that our economic efficiency and the efficiency of almost every aspect of our economy, including our healthcare systems, are driven by data. Whether you call it big data or AI or machine learning or data mining, through processing larger volumes of data and higher fidelity data, we can become much more efficient and much more effective in our healthcare industry and other industries. And that exposes that interoperability of data, the availability of data to clinicians. And if you've been to a doctor's office in the last decade, as I have, you see that all that data gets entered, while you're in the doctor's office. It is a little bit terrifying. But if we're going to make that data available, it also means that data can be denied to us, as we saw happen in Ireland's healthcare system, and as we've seen in other nations. And so that should be a significant cause of concern. As we design these infrastructures and as we design the interoperability of these data exchanges, we need to make sure that not just privacy, but security go hand in glove with the design of these architectures, and that the organizations that are operating them are exercising a high degree of care with the data that is entrusted to them. It is very personal. It is very private. And these providers need to make sure that they're validating the security that they have to baseline standards, that they're maintaining these systems with a very high degree of care, that they're not behaving negligent and letting these systems lapse in terms of their patching and keeping them up to date and validating the entitlements and the access to this data on a regular and continuous basis, and that they're monitoring it for ongoing breach activity, and that they're also transparent about those breaches and that they're taking these steps, because the transparency will drive better accountability throughout any open market, free market type of system. So there's a lot to be done here, but I think if we do it right, there can be tremendous progress.
And are you, just one last question on that before I get back to Barbara, are you feeling some sense of optimism that policymakers get this as well, that they understand, that they're hearing from their constituents perhaps, that these are critical issues to address, and that the ability of all consumers to benefit from advances in healthcare technology is dependent on getting the data protection right and putting the right policy solutions in place?
I'm not sure that all industries, and the healthcare industry included in that, is and has a very profound appreciation for that. What I do believe to be the case is that the cybersecurity advocates, the cybersecurity professionals in the White House and the Department of Homeland Security and in private industry have a louder mouthpiece. They have national and enterprise decision makers' ears for perhaps the first time, and that there's an ability to affect organizational behavior that we haven't seen in previous years and in previous periods. So the awareness is coming, and hopefully following that awareness, there's a real call to action with the things that we can, hope from a government action perspective. Let's drive the transparency. Let's drive the accountability. If we drive transparency and accountability, the markets will behave in a radically different fashion than they have in previous years. And that is the key, right? The government can't solve this problem for industry or for the American population. It's the industry that owns and operates these systems that needs to step up to the plate.
Yeah. Barbara, that reminds me of a question actually that came in from the audience before we started that is actually pertinent to what Amit is talking about the role of government and other industries, and back to your prior observations about infrastructure. And that's in the area of advanced energy technology. The Biden administration has highlighted 4 policy priorities that it's been working on this year. Climate change is one of those 4. And obviously, this is an area that the tech industry is very involved in. Siemens in particular, deploying a lot of innovative technology and transportation solutions that advance clean energy goals. So, Barbara, I wanted to ask you about some of the most promising advanced energy technologies that you think are actually attainable in time to mitigate some of the climate change disasters that we see on the horizon. And of course, I want to ask you to tie that to policy decisions that can be made in Washington that might help advance some of those technology solutions.
Certainly. And Jason, I love the fact that you're using words like hope and optimism as we have this conversation. I mean, those are strange words to use with cybersecurity. I love it. I mean, I'm totally with you on this, but this is the right frame of mind we need to have, because the fact is the technologies that we're talking about exist today. They're ready to be deployed and can have a remarkable positive impact on the challenges we're dealing with. And in fact, I'll just say to the viewers, please tune into my podcast, The Optimistic Outlook. I'm talking to people who are living and breathing in these various worlds of infrastructure and asking them about the things that they see coming. And I've gotten quite an education through the series. I'm delighted to share it with others. When I think about the energy infrastructure, the thing I'm most excited about is the fact that we are now at a point where we can deploy microgrids in order to manage so many of the factors that are challenging us today. When you think about disruptions due to storms or disruptions due to natural disaster, I've seen with my own eyes the way that microgrids actually provide resilience and protect communities, whether it's in tribal lands in Northern California. Blue Lake Rancheria put in a microgrid that involved solar, some storage. They had an interconnect with PG&E. And when PG&E needed to do power outages during wildfire season, Blue Lake Rancheria was able to stay up and running and be a power supply to the region. Or think about the storms that happened in Texas. And we were working with SMU. We had provided digital controls that allow the facilities folks at SMU to direct power to where it's needed. And the campus was able to stay up and running, prevent pipes from freezing and such, because they had that ability. So these digital tools that are with us now have the capacity to be game changers and to help us achieve the goals we're going for. So what's my message to policymakers in the midst of all this? Well, one is it's a brilliant moment to invite tech experts in and to talk about the art of the possible. And then the next question is to look carefully at where we may be generating policies where maybe we're perhaps foiling our own best interests. And I'll just give you a quick example. Think about something like we need to get more renewable energy on the grid. We just do. And yet we're thinking about things like tariffs on solar panels coming in. Well, do you know how long it's going to take us to actually rebuild a solar panel industry that had moved offshore some time ago? Let's not use tariffs right now. Let's, in fact, incentivize the building of the facilities we need so that we can be ready for domestic production of things that are key to our future. But let's not put any barriers in place to actually advancing the clean energy future that this administration is striving for.
You mentioned your podcast. So before we go on to our next question about supply chains, I want to echo your own effort to get people to listen to your podcast. It is absolutely fascinating. It's called The Optimistic Outlook, and it includes your interviews with policy figures, members of Congress, and it includes leadership lessons, which I find enormously valuable. You're very personal in your podcast. You talk about your own experience with COVID and leadership lessons from that. And nobody asked me to do this. I'm just telling people completely unprompted that it is a great listen, and I highly encourage people to check it out.
Wow, thank you.
So now back to questions of global supply chain. You mentioned tariffs, and of course, tariffs are not a trade policy, but unfortunately, we've seen them used as a trade policy, and we are all optimistic, if I can use that word again, about trade policy under the Biden administration and moving forward to advance the global supply chain, to recognize the fact that 95% of the consumers on planet Earth live outside of the United States, and that we all source materials and products and services from outside the US, from inside the US, and that tech manufacturing in particular is a global industry. So, Barbara, I want to ask you to pick up that thread on trade and the global nature of the industry. Siemens obviously is a global organization itself. So you are well familiar with having suppliers and partner networks around the world. So in addition to the importance of collaboration that you alluded to before, and I'd like to hear more about, there are also national security interests wrapped up in this as well, that we hear a lot about the need to protect supply chains while also recognizing that those supply chains are global. It's not an easy question. And Barbara, I wanted to ask how you approach it.
Yeah, well, actually, so I'll share with everyone that Siemens' business strategy is built on a set of 5 megatrends. We are recognizing climate change, urbanization, the aging demographics of people everywhere, the digitalization of everything. And then there's this one we used to talk about, globalization of supply chains, but we're now talking about it with one letter changed, glocalization. What we're doing, we're recognizing that there's innovation going on globally, but we now have both the opportunity and I'll say the responsibility to ensure that regions are able to have access to materials, to supplies, to that supply chain. And so we, Siemens, are introducing a lot of technology that we know is going to be helpful in empowering more regional supply. And simple things like digitalization actually helps with the overall approach. What if a designer in Houston, Texas, could actually assure that a part needed for some critical machine, call it the Joint Strike Fighter, could be actually produced with additive manufacturing somewhere else in the world. That's possible now with the digital tools of design and engineering. And so these globalization obviously is a huge, huge theme. And it's one that I believe is going to actually, I think policymakers in the US are actually going to embrace, because one of the things we really want is to promote American jobs, find more things that we can actually build and produce in the US. And one of the most interesting of those things right now is semiconductors. I was really pleased a week or more ago to participate in the Department of Commerce and White House discussion with industry about the semiconductor supply chain, and where people from all parts of the supply chain were represented in the conversation. And by the way, Siemens is an interesting player in all this because yes, we use semiconductors when we produce things like the electric vehicle chargers I talked about earlier, but we also make software and hardware that's used in the production process. And we are suppliers to many who are huge consumers of semiconductors. Anyway, so you can see we're incredibly embedded in the overall issue that we're having here. Well, again, this is a moment when we can drive change. And what has arisen is something really interesting, which I liken to what happened with cybersecurity. When we hit a supply chain challenge like this, the supply of semiconductors, you can think about the way we as industry have reacted to cyber threats. I mean, what was our first notion? It was, let's create an industry group. Let's share lessons learned. Let's make sure that when we have breaches, we're being transparent about that so others will know and can protect themselves. We know that addressing this as an industry challenge and working together actually helps the entire industry. Same thing is happening with the semiconductors. So I'm pleased to see government in a position of fostering that collaboration and transparency. And I think we'll look across the portfolio of critical supplies that we need and find a couple of areas where it would make sense to have this kind of communication across industries so that we prevent bottlenecks and make sure that we really can secure the flow of goods and services to the nation.
That kind of cooperation is so important. And Amit, I want to come back to you on this international cooperation issue. You obviously have an international footprint for Tenable, and one of the areas in cybersecurity that we probably could use a bit more international cooperation is around ransomware attacks, and we read about those every day. And many companies participating in this event today have been victims of ransomware attacks, and it feels as if, particularly because of the international scope of ransomware, in some cases state-sponsored or state-supported actors engaging in this kind of criminal behavior. Seems like we could benefit from more international cooperation on ransomware, but I don't know that we're seeing it happen quite enough. Wanted to get your thoughts, Amit, on the simple question, and it's actually a question we got in from the audience as well. How do we stop ransomware, and how do we move forward on things that aren't working right now?
Yeah, well, it's very clear. It's a great question. It's very clear that what we're doing now isn't working. So we've got to change. And it's it's a multi-pronged approach, but there's two pillars that can be applied here. And the first is this rule that you've got to protect yourself. This is not an area where anybody else is going to be able to come in and solve this problem for you. The threat is tremendous. The challenges of international cooperation don't move quickly, and the international law enforcement cooperative agreements do not bode well for this issue to be addressed in over a short period of time. So, rule number one is, for any organization, for any enterprise, is protect yourself. And if you look at a vast supermajority, 90+% of the ransomware, which has caused issues over the last 2 years, it's coming and going against well-known, well-advertised problems that exist in IT, which are simply going unaddressed, which are not getting remediated, which are not being taken care of by IT systems management, corporate leadership, wherever you want to have the buck stop. So we've got to recognize that we're operating in a threat environment where we can't rely on government or governments or anyone else to protect us. And we've got to put in the cycles to manage our systems, to tighten the controls around them, and do our job, do our due diligence of protecting ourselves. Now, I'm not blaming the victims here. What I'm saying is, you're operating IT in a high threat environment, and that's the reality that we're living in. and you've got to better protect yourself. And the second prong here is there's a tremendous amount that the government can, should, and will hopefully continue to do, and do more aggressively than it's done in years past, which is recognize the cost of ransomware in terms of lost productivity, in terms of lost economic value. And I think we saw a lawsuit filed over the last 24, 48 hours from a healthcare provider, against a healthcare provider in Mobile, Alabama, where someone is contending that there was loss of life based on the unavailability of critical systems due to ransomware and sloppy IT work. So there's a lot that the government can do here. Very encouraged by the Biden administration convening 30 plus nations to help go after ransomware. And the government's got to use all of the tools at its disposal. And that means applying law enforcement cooperative agreements. It means providing pressure. It means demarches. It means PNG people out. It means freezing of assets. It means sanctions. It means countermeasures, which we might take against nations. So there's a wide aperture that we need to be viewing cybersecurity through. And ransomware is today's form of that, which seems to be most painful for many Americans and for many organizations within the US and certainly in the Western world. But this is going to evolve. It's ransomware today. It was denial of service attack before that, and identity theft before that. And we can reasonably expect that this is going to morph. And if we go after ransomware, it's going to evolve to some other mechanism which achieves the objectives of the cyber criminals and nation states which are harboring them or condoning them or operating with these cyber criminals. So we've got to address it organically, improving our cybersecurity as enterprises, defending ourselves, and we've got to address it through a broad aperture of national policy.
It's an interesting reminder that security in the cybersecurity world is as important or more important than security in the physical world. It used to be the case that the only way you could disrupt networks was to cut a wire or knock down a pole. And that is certainly not the case now. You don't need to be anywhere near the infrastructure to bring it all down. So a great reminder, Amit, of the importance of including funding for and policies that support the cyber infrastructure security as well as the physical infrastructure as well. I want to return to the priorities of the Biden administration announced those 4 priorities that we were talking about before. One of them is fostering diversity, inclusion, equity. And you're both employers of people and are very focused in your respective companies on promoting DE&I. So I want to ask each of you, Barbara, I'll start with you, to talk about the connection between advancing innovation and the inclusion of diverse voices and experiences in your company, across the tech industry, and indeed across all industries. We know that good tech policy includes diversity, equity, and inclusion. And we know at ITI, this has been a focus of our organization, and we know our member companies are focused it very seriously as well. So Barbara, let me start with you and the Siemens perspective. How are you approaching DE&I issues and opportunities at Siemens? What are the things the tech industry should be looking at? What questions should we be asking ourselves in order to advance these important issues?
Yeah, thanks, Jason. Hey, you'll hear a statement often from us that our technology is only as strong as the people behind it. You'll hear from us that we know that there's a business imperative for diversity, that we need people with diverse backgrounds actually designing the technology systems of the future. And I just want to give a quick illustration from my own experience that will help illustrate what we're talking about. When I started my career, I was a software developer back when computer programming was just being invented, I must say. And so, I'm guessing that programming has come a long way since then, but there was one practice that we had that had nothing to do with technology. It was all about human beings in the loop, and that was an inspection of software. I would write some software, and before I would go and test it, we would actually do a physical inspection, have people read the code and look for bugs. And it's really interesting because a single person looking at that code might find bugs. Two people looking at that code might find more bugs. But what we discovered was that when you put 5 people together, IBM, very data driven, this is where I was learning the craft. And what we discovered is that when you had 5 people together looking at software, it was almost like there was a ghost inspector in the room. We found more than any of us individually or collectively could have found. It's that concept, that idea that you need diverse voices and perspectives in the room to actually help others in the room discover something new. That's the power of diversity. And so, what are we trying to do in our deep engineering business in order to foster more of that and get more diverse voices at the table? Well, something we did this summer I'm very proud of was we joined in the HBCU Partnership Challenge created by Congresswoman Alma Adams. And our intent was to expand our partnerships and talent recruitment at HBCUs. And we also began working with the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation's new C-suite internship program. Very cool to meet people who are just thinking about their careers and giving them the benefit of insight into our business and then having them take that back into school and elsewhere. We're communicating a lot about where the jobs are. It's actually a campaign of ours to help people understand where these 2,000 jobs that we have open at any given time are, so that we can draw more people into the fields that we are passionate about. And then we have a philanthropic arm, the Siemens Foundation. I have the privilege of serving as the chair of the board for the foundation, and we've given more than $130 million into workforce development and STEM education programs. We're trying to build a stronger pathway for people to enter the fields like ours or those of our customers. So with all of that, we're thinking not only about our own employees, but also about our customers, and we're thinking about our suppliers and the diversity of our suppliers. I mean, I'd love to hear about how that looks from your end of things.
That's terrific. Amit, can you talk to us a little bit about your approach to DEI at Tenable as well?
Yeah, it's something that is and has been incredibly important to us as an organization and remains front and center for us. I'll break it down into maybe 2 different categories. There are those things that we're doing internally at Tenable. We know diversity is a great and important step forward, but that diversity needs to go hand in glove with inclusion. So we provide systemic things, the coaching, the tooling available to our leaders in how they can be more inclusive as they operate their organizations, as they go through the decision-making processes that we have in place as an organization. Things like employee resource groups and making sure that those employee resource groups have executive sponsors that are actively engaged. We work very hard to try and create a bias-free workspace. Again, everybody brings biases to the table. Hopefully we recognize them quickly and more often than we have in years past. How do we provide the tooling to our employees and our leaders so they can recognize the biases that they're bringing to the table, and that we can improve our practices and the processes that we have in place as an organization? And the third one that I want to emphasize is that we're trying to hold ourselves to a very high standard, but one that is about continuous improvement. And in order to do that, you have to have data. You have to look at metrics. And are we willing as an organization to have those, to dig into the data and see what it tells us, and to have those tough conversations, looking at things like third-party audits of our pay practices to make sure that we are a fair and equitable employer, and other metrics that matter to us at all levels of the organization. So we've got a very broad set of initiatives, and as you might imagine, we've got a team of folks that could talk about this at great length for hours, as I'm sure Barbara does. But this is something that we feel very strongly about and believe very strongly in as an organization. And then there's a series of external things that we do as what we hope to believe to be an employer of choice, but also as an important member in the societies and the communities that we operate in. So as part of a broader ecosystem trying to drive change. And so we're very active with many organizations externally, and everything from providing funding all the way through very actively engaged in programs with things like Build.org, Women in Cybersecurity, International Consortium of Minority Cybersecurity Professionals, actively engaged in recruiting efforts with historically Black colleges and universities, STEM for Her program, Diana Initiative, and of course this month with the Hispanic Awareness Month, the Society for Hispanic Professional Engineers. And as I'm sure Barbara we go on and on about the number of things that we're doing and the ways that we're engaging as part of a broader ecosystem for change, and to get greater diversity and greater inclusion of diverse perspectives into whether it's our software development practices, our corporate decision-making, how we think about supporting our customers, how we message and position ourselves as an organization. So just bringing that diversity of perspective and that inclusion of diversity into the decision-making practices that we have, I think makes us, and the data says, makes us a stronger organization. So we're very active on many fronts here, but it's one that I think no one organization is doing quite enough around.
Absolutely right, and an important initiative for all in the industry to be working on. And Barbara, I want to come back to you on a related topic, and you alluded to it, and that is the pipeline, the STEM education pipeline that you rely on, that every leader in an ITI member company that is looking to bring on the best and the brightest onto the team and fill those openings. Barbara, you mentioned the partnership with the HBCU caucus, Congresswoman Alma Adams, spending every day that she can, talking to everybody she can to encourage those HBCU partnerships. They're so important. And I wanted to ask you to talk to us about your view on the role that the industry can play in increasing access to education. So we obviously want to make sure that all Americans have access to educational opportunities. Some have said, as to STEM education, it's particularly important that we start as early as possible, even as way back as elementary school, to get more diverse communities access to STEM education. So it's not just people in certain zip codes that have access to STEM education and can take advantage of these opportunities, these jobs of the future. So can you talk to us about Siemens' perspective on this, and in particular, to tie it to our tech policy theme today, what should policymakers be focusing on to help address this STEM education gap?
Yeah, great question. And Congresswoman Adams obviously focused on HBCUs. We recognize as well that this question of diversity in all of our higher educational institutions is key. So, but it doesn't start there. It actually starts far earlier in a child's education. Education may be the single most important thing we do as a nation. And think about it, the innovation engine that we have in the United States is driven in large part because of the educational system that we have here. People come from all over the world to be educated. Now, is a four-year degree the only path to the American dream? Absolutely not. And so we've been focused on supporting many, many pathways. And for our own part, we've been working to make sure that educational groups as early as K through 12 have access to technology and innovative teaching techniques that will help to ignite an interest in STEM as early as possible, by the way, and keep the diversity of young people interested in the field for as long as possible. so many people sort of self-select out of these science and technology fields rather early in life. So what we're doing is a combination of things. Sometimes literally just our employees volunteering in schools and other places, being involved in policymaking, at the local level. We're everywhere. So Siemens' voice can be heard in neighborhoods all across this great country. And then, the question is, can policy incentivize companies to invest more? I really do think this is something that is worthy of thought, because we all know that we've got policies that incentivize investment in things, property, plant, and equipment. What about investment in people? And so, we see the development of policy along those lines now, and we're very much supporting it. And then what we're doing for our part is looking for opportunities to make grants of our software and hardware into educational programs that are going to give people the chance to choose pathways into these kinds of jobs. Now, a lot of people ask me about apprenticeships, because Siemens, being a German company, takes full advantage of the apprenticeship model. A very robust German apprenticeship model is a great, sort of role model for us. But here in the U.S., we have to implement this with what I'll call American spirit, right? We don't have that integration of policy that spans the educational system and industries and draws the whole career pathway together. Instead, it's much more about entrepreneurial freedom. What we've found is it's the community college system that is really ripe for being that partner to apprenticeships with companies like ours, where somebody entering a manufacturing floor today needs that combination of hands-on learning that comes with the traditional in-factory apprenticeship model, plus the in-classroom learning about some of the programming and other digital skills that they're going to be needing. So these new collar, if you will, not white collar, blue collar, new collar jobs that so many are stepping into these days are well supported through that combination of hands-on with a company like ours and the educational system. And I say, let's think about community colleges there.
Yeah, and these are good things to be addressed, but they are also things that you need to address. One of your podcasts recently was about the fact that there are 800,000 tech job openings in the U.S. So I can imagine that you view this as the right thing to do, but you also need it for your business.
We need it. Manufacturers everywhere need to fill those jobs, and 360,000 open jobs in cybersecurity. Listen for an upcoming episode with Joanna Berkey, CISO of HP.
Well, that's a great segue to ask Amit the same question. Those cybersecurity openings, there are jobs going unfilled. I'm sure you have a challenge at Tenable finding all the great people you need, but it's true across all industries because everybody needs cybersecurity professionals. It's true in the government. Government needs more good people. What's your perspective on how you can increase the pipeline of professionals needed to defend our infrastructure against attack?
Yeah, it's a great question. We're doing a number of things, certainly on the STEM side, whether it's internships, which we're very active with, scholarships, which we provide as a company, donations that we make to organizations which are driving a lot of diversity in STEM activities. We also have our own education initiative called Tenable for Education. We operate and offer the world's most broadly used technology for assessing system vulnerability. And so within this program, it includes providing free access to that technology for educators and free access to that technology for students so that they can learn the basics of assessing systems for vulnerability and exposures, and they can move up to whatever degree of sophistication. We also make all of our training content available to those educators and students free of charge. And this is an area where, of course, four-year degrees and graduate work can be incredibly rewarding, but it's also an area where many professionals are self-taught or learn the basics themselves and then decide to pursue a career in cybersecurity. So something that you can engage in with your free time, learn more, download, start playing. What I've found over the years is that an intellectual curiosity in cybersecurity is the single greatest factor to whether someone will be successful in the field or not. And if you give us an intellectually curious apprentice or someone that has a passion for the field and wants to learn more about it, they will excel at it. And you can take someone who's had all the formal training and education in the world. If they don't have that curiosity, if they don't want to look at problems from 10 different angles, they're not going to drive the type of value. So we're doing a lot, both through the formal STEM programs as well as informal programs, or formal programs for other forms of learning more about cybersecurity that we think are just as effective. And we've had more than 2 million downloads and users on and coming through those free programs. So it's definitely a skill set that adds value in the marketplace and that people want to take advantage. The other thing that I think we need to emphasize as an industry is the asymmetric nature of cybersecurity. Where everybody gets very bent around the axle, saying, "Hey, there's a 3 million person shortage of people to fill jobs in this area," and of course there is a critical shortage. And we need to increase the population of people that are cyber capable. The flip side is we need to take those cybersecurity professionals that we do have and give them an asymmetric scale that we haven't done historically through improved processes and improved technologies that can help one expert much more efficiently address a much broader swath of technology in a much more focused and efficient fashion than we've done. And so there's a lot of work happening in private industry and at Tenable to help make our cybersecurity professionals and our cyber programs more efficient and more scalable.
Good people doing great innovative work on behalf of the country. I wish we could continue talking about this, but we have come to an end of our time together. Let me thank our two very special guests today at the ITI Bridge for Innovation event. Barbara Humpton is the president and CEO of Siemens Corporation. Barbara, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you, Jason.
And Amit Yoran is the chairman and chief executive officer of Tenable. Amit, thank you so much for being with us today.
Jason, Barbara, great being with you guys and appreciate the opportunity.
A terrific conversation today about technology's importance to our economy and what good public policy can do to enhance innovation. And I want to thank all of you in the audience for taking time to join us here today as we kick off our Bridge for Innovation campaign. You'll be hearing from us more soon about all of these issues in the coming months. We'll be taking a deeper dive into issues including data protection, climate and energy, education, and more on DE&I. In the meantime, please take the time to visit our new website at bridgeforinnovation.org to learn more about this important initiative. I'm Jason Oxman on behalf of ITI. Look forward to seeing you next time.